In early January, French President Macron made a significant statement that only few people like President Traore took note of. He said that France is not on the back foot in Africa, it is just lucid and reorganizing itself. Macron said this in response to the fact that France has lost its influence in Africa, especially in the Sahel as a result of the revolutionary coups. His statement notes that France has a new strategy to remain in the Sahel region. So, despite the fact that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have cut ties with France, France is keen on retaining its foothold in these countries. The question is why, and what is the new strategy? Let's find out. In 1957, President François Mitterrand that without Africa, France would not have any position in the 21st century. He was quite categorical that France could only have any position in the 21st century if it maintained its control over African former colonies. Similarly, in 2008, President Jacques Chirac re-echoed the prophecy that without Africa, France will be relegated to the rank of a third power. With the military leaders of the Sahel cutting ties with France, it seems that these words are about to be fulfilled. For example, French corporations that have had a foothold in the Sahel since independence have experienced massive losses since France's fallout in the Sahel. These corporations were established by the French colonial master to ship cheap raw materials and minerals to France. These minerals, including gold and uranium, were used to industrialize and develop France. France doesn't have a single gold mine, but it boasts the world's fourth largest gold reserves, with an estimated 2,437 tons worth $112 billion. While France has some minerals like coal deposits and iron ore, over time, France has always depended on its colonies for most of its minerals. No wonder François Mitterrand said that, without Africa, France would not have any position in the 21st century. France has built its image of a country with strong economic and industrial strength on the resources of its former colonies. However, things have begun to change, especially in the Sahel. Although President Macron has denied this repeatedly, everyone knows that France was kicked out of the Sahel by the military leaders. These leaders, despite being condemned by France and its Western allies, have remained resolute in their decision to create a fully independent and sovereign country. This means a country without any iota of France's influence. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can have more videos like this. However, this decision is bad news for France, and France, especially its corporations, have begun to feel it. For instance, Air France, France's national airline, reported a loss of 65 million euros after it was kicked out of the Sahel. When the coup occurred, France immediately suspended visas to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. If you recall, this suspension affected not just ordinary citizens but also students of these countries studying in France. It also affected artists from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. However, France did not care about the consequences of its decision. France thought that this move would push the military leaders out of power, but nothing of such happened. In addition to the suspension of visas, Air France, France's national airline, suspended flights to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. As a result, the French carrier had to direct its route to Central Africa and announced a partnership with Gabonese Airlines. You see, Air France is the fifth largest airline globally by financial performance, and it serves 189 destinations in 74 countries. Now, Air France is the main airline between Europe and Africa, which means that prior to the suspension, it usually flew over Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger very often. For example, it had 7 flights per week in Mali, 5 flights per week in Burkina Faso, and 4 flights in Niger. However, after the coup occurred in Niger and Niger closed its airspace, France classified the capitals of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso as red zone destinations. This meant France regarded these countries as danger zones and advised its nationals against visiting them. Few months after Air France suspended the flights, it realized that it had made a huge mistake in suspending flights to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In the short period that it suspended flights to these countries, Air France revealed that it had lost about 65 million euros. Isn't that astonishing? Flights to the 3 Sahel countries were worth 65 million euros in that short period of time. But this is where it gets interesting. When Air France suspended its flight to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, It was initially for several days. But then for some reason, the airline decided to extend the suspension till August 2024, citing Niger's coup and the geopolitical situation in the Sahel region. However, the authorities in Mali were not happy with the decision, and they retaliated by revoking the Air France permit. Now, in August 2024, Air France announced that it was finally ready to resume service to Mali. According to the Malian officials, the decision was cancelled because the agreement was given without consulting the hierarchy. Can you imagine that? Air France announced that it was going to resume flight operations in the country without consulting the authorities. How does that even make sense? But should we be surprised? It's the typical paternalistic and superiority complex of the West. Well, the authorities in Mali were not ready to take that attitude, and they did what was best for them. Till today, the flights have not resumed. And guess what? The citizens in these countries did not die. But Air France is just one example. What about Orano, the French uranium mining giant company that has been in Niger since independence? Like Air France, Orano is currently in trouble. The company has reported a drop in its share price and has lost its hold on a major uranium mine which it has been operating for years. Now, when the coup in Niger occurred, the head of Macron's Renaissance Party, Sylvain Maillard, spoke on France Info Radio, saying that France is following the situation in Niger very closely, not only in case it endangers the population, but also for its impact on France's economic interests. As you well know, uranium is part of the equation, so we're watching what is happening very attentively, he said. This goes to show you just how much France is interested in Niger's uranium. However, just like the other members of the AES Confederation, the military leader of Niger, General Tiani, has decided to take charge of the country's resources. You see, when he came to power, the general vowed to review foreign mining concessions in the country, and since then he has made several moves in this direction. First, he suspended the issuance of new mining licenses in January this year and ordered an audit of the sector. And now he has just revoked the operating license that allowed French nuclear fuel producer Orano, formerly Areva, to operate one of the world's largest uranium mines. The news was announced a few days ago by the French company itself. According to Al Jazeera, Orano announced that it had been denied access to mine from the Imaralin mine in northern Niger, which is estimated to contain 200,000 tons of uranium. The Imaralin mine boasts one of the world's largest uranium reserves and is one of Niger's 3 largest uranium deposits. One of the 2 remaining mines, the Somaire mine, is currently controlled 63.4% by Orano and 36.6% by the Niger State Company, while the other relic, the Cominac mine, has been decommissioned due to resource depletion. So obviously the Imaralin mine is the future, and France wants to get it because uranium is very important for the French energy industry and even for Europe as a whole. According to reports, France gets 65% of its electricity from nuclear energy, and nuclear power requires uranium, but the European Union relies on Niger for about a quarter of its uranium supplies. What's interesting is that France already had the operating license for the Imaralin mine, even though it was the only uranium producer in Niger since independence. The company was expected to start mining there as early as 2015. However, this did not happen as uranium prices collapsed after the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. The Imaralin mine was therefore abandoned until a military government was established. The Nigerian Ministry of Mines reportedly threatened to revoke Orano's license if development work did not commence by June 19th. A week before the deadline, Orano reported that it had resumed operations at the site. The company said in a statement that, given current market conditions and continuing rising uranium prices, we may reconsider commissioning Imaralin. However, on June 20th, Nigerian authorities sent Orano a letter stating that the company's resolution plan did not meet our expectations. The mine was then reverted to public ownership and stripped of all contractual rights. This was a major blow to France, and as you can imagine, the company did not take this decision lightly. But the military authorities of Niger did not stop there. Earlier this month, Orano announced that the military leader of Niger has taken control of its local mining firm Somaire. Recall that after removing the ownership of the Imaralin mine from Orano, the company was left with the Somaire mine. But now even that has been reverted back to the government's ownership. In other words, Orano is in a financial crisis, And guess what? Niger's decision to completely kick out Orano is currently being felt across Europe. You see, in recent times, Niger accounted for a quarter of the supply to nuclear power plants across Europe. And given that Western countries are struggling to meet the challenge of climate change and cut their carbon emissions from electricity generation, the timing is pretty much awkward. But it's not just French corporations that have been affected by the decisions of the military leaders. France is currently facing a political and economic crisis. It is grappling with high public debt, soaring energy prices, and rising interest rates. While the general idea is that the economic crisis is a result of internal factors, we can't help but draw a correlation between France's current economic crisis and a reduction in its influence in Africa. According to Rama Yade, senior director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, public debt in France has increased by more than half in 7 years, from 2 trillion euros to 3.2 trillion euros. Not to mention, France has 9 million people living in poverty, an increase in factory closures, and a foreign trade deficit of around 100 billion euros in 2023, a sign of an accelerated deindustrialization of the French economy. Denis Ferrand, head of Paris-based economic research institute Rexicode, confirmed a similar notion, stating that the French economy has weakened over the past few years. According to him, French and European companies have become less competitive with Chinese ones, as production costs have risen by 25% since 2019. But he added that it was a result of years of high inflation, rising interest rates, and soaring energy prices, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. However, isn't it interesting that this economic crisis is happening at the same time when France's influence has drastically reduced in Africa? With all this, it is pretty clear that Africa is important to France. This has been confirmed by a French scholar, Xavier Renaud. According to him, Africa is critically important to France for several reasons, including maintaining an international status, independent of US and Chinese influences, securing a permanent access to strategic resources, and benefiting from a monopolistic situation. And to attain these objectives and maintain its power over its former colonies, France has to pursue a global policy that is economic, political, and cultural. This is the reason why every successive administration in France has continued the colonial legacy. So you can see why Macron made that statement last month. He said France is not on the back foot in Africa, it is just lucid and reorganizing itself. Now, as we said, only a few people like President Traore took note of his statement. But what new strategy is Macron planning to implement? The answer can be found in a recent interview made by President Traore. In the interview, Traore said, "When I recently heard the words of Emmanuel Macron, I realized that every conscious African needs to understand quickly what he means. General Tiani said not long ago that France simply decided to change its tactics and strategies in Africa. This new tactic is about dissolving some certain elements, but keeping a strong foundation in Africa." And Emmanuel Macron simply confirmed this in his speech, which we should thank him for. If you think about Traore's words critically, you will know that it makes sense. Every French leader since independence has always had an African strategy, and there is no way that President Macron would easily give that up. Macron knows that he needs Africa. However, since the military leaders have cut ties with him militarily, he has to find another strategy to regain influence in the Sahel. But what exactly is this strategy? Well, in the interview, Traore said, "They will not leave some countries. They have just dissolved the system. You will no longer see them in bases, but in the embassy they will be there. They will build security companies to secure the companies that exist in these countries. But the soldiers will be there. You will no longer see them in uniforms or gathered in bases. That's all it means. They will reorganize, but they will be there." This is deep. And if you think about it, it does make sense. When Ivory Coast announced that it was kicking out French forces, we were shocked because everyone knows that the president of Ivory Coast is a French puppet. With Traore's statement, it now makes sense why Ivory Coast kicked French forces out. Obviously, it was a plan made by France to create the narrative that they decided to leave the continent militarily. But as Traore said, it's a farce. French soldiers will no longer be in Ivory Coast or any other country whose leader is a French puppet. But there will be French security companies whose mandate will be to continue to protect French interests. Now, Traore went on to say that Macron spoke of politeness towards certain heads of state by giving them the primacy of announcing the breakup or departure of the French forces, but it doesn't matter to us. This is quite interesting. If you recall in the statement made by Macron, he said that France was not kicked out of the Sahel region. According to Macron, France simply decided to reorganize its African strategy. In his own words, no, France is not on the back foot in Africa, it is just lucid and reorganizing itself. Macron also implied that France already decided to withdraw from the Sahel countries, but decided to allow the countries to announce that they were kicking France out. How exactly does this make sense, and who does Macron want to fool? African countries kicking out French troops and ending things with France humiliated France on the global scene. So how possible is it that France would allow these countries to say something like that if it were not true? Macron is obviously lying and trying to save face. The only country that France can boldly say it decided to leave is Ivory Coast. We all know that the president of Ivory Coast is a French puppet and would never dream of telling France to leave the country. This is why Macron had the boldness to say that some African countries did not want France to leave. Traore further highlighted how the Sahel countries kicked out French forces, using Chad as an example. He said, "If you want to break up with these imperialist forces, it's simple. We denounce the agreement, it all starts there." I think that the example of Chad in any case is palpable. They started by denouncing the agreements. Otherwise, if we don't denounce the agreement and just say that the base is leaving, we haven't done anything. So what does this tell you? It means that France did not truly leave Ivory Coast. Now, if you have been following the news, in the case of Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and even Chad, the report was always that these countries ended the defense agreement with France, which has been existing since colonial times. For Ivory Coast, however, the report was simply that France withdrew its troops from the country. In simple terms, the idea that France has left Ivory Coast is a sham. The only places that France has truly left are Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad, because these countries denounced the defense agreement they had with France. What an eye-opening revelation. France is employing a new strategy to remain in the Sahel. But the leaders of the Sahel are watchful and vigilant. With the military leaders in power, we are confident that France's new strategy would not succeed. What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and share this video.